In the dim gaslight of Victorian Bradford, a peculiar family legacy began to take shape, one that would ultimately lead to Albert Pierrepoint becoming Britain's most famous executioner, born on March 30, 1905. In Clayton, Bradford at 5 Manningham Lane, Albert was destined to follow in the footsteps of both his father Henry Pierrepoint and his uncle Thomas Pierrepoint, who had already established themselves in the somber profession of judicial execution. The family's connection to capital punishment dated back to 1901, when Henry witnessed his first execution at Newgate Prison, performed by James Billington, the man who would later become his mentor. Henry Pierrepoint had served as an executioner from 1901 until his dismissal in 1910. Due to his struggles with alcohol, during which time he had performed 105 executions. His most notable case was the execution of Sir Roger Casement in 1916 at Pentonville Prison for high treason. Young Albert would often find his father's diary hidden behind a loose brick in their modest H's fireplace, carefully documenting the executions he had carried out. These detailed accounts, written in Henry's steady hand, would leave an indelible mark on Albert's young mind. In one particularly poignant entry from 1905, Henry had written, "The supreme penalty of the law ought to be carried out as perfectly as human power can make it." Another entry from 1908 revealed his father's growing disillusionment. "Each man has to die alone. I have come to believe that executing these men is wrong." The Pierrepoint family's financial situation was precarious at best. They lived at 77 Marlborough Road, a small terrace house in Bradford's industrial district, where the air was thick with factory smoke and the streets echoed with the sounds of mill machinery from Manningham Mills, the largest silk factory in Europe at the time. Albert's mother, Mary, worked tirelessly as a washerwoman to supplement the family's income. After Henry's dismissal, she would take in washing from the local mill workers, earning mere pennies per item. This economic hardship would later drive Albert to seek stable employment with the role of executioner, offering both financial security and a sense of purpose. The family moved frequently during Albert's childhood, living in at least 5 different addresses in Bradford between 1905 and 1920. Despite their struggles, Albert's childhood wasn't entirely overshadowed by his family's connection to capital punishment. He attended St. Paul's Church of England school until the age of 14, where he was known as a quiet, methodical student with a particular aptitude for mathematics, a skill that would prove invaluable in his future career. However, the family's reputation followed them. Local children would sometimes taunt young Albert with makeshift nooses, crying out Jack catch," referring to the infamous 17th century executioner. In later years, Albert recalled how one teacher, Miss Sarah Lofthouse, had taken him aside and told him, "There's more to life than following your father's path." Albert, at age 11, made a remarkable entry in his school notebook: "When I leave school, I should like to be public executioner like my dad, as I think it needs a steady man with good hands like my dad and my uncle Tom, and I shall be the same." This early declaration of intent would prove prophetic, though the path to achieving it would be far from straightforward. The notebook preserved by his sister Anne also contained detailed drawings of gallows and mathematical calculations that showed his early fascination with the mechanics of execution. Before pursuing his calling, Albert worked various jobs, including a stint as a drayman for Wheatley & Sons, a wholesale grocer in Bradford, and time as a lorry driver for Bryant and May's Matchworks in Liverpool. He earned 18 shillings per week at his first job, barely enough to help support his family. However, the pull of the family tradition remained strong. In 1931, at the age of 26, he began his formal application to become an assistant executioner. His uncle Thomas, who had by then established himself as a respected executioner with over 300 executions to his name, supported his application to the Home Office with a letter stating the boy has the family's steady hands and clear mind. The training process was rigorous and secretive. In 1932, Albert received his first official instruction at Pentonville Prison under the guidance of Morris Ascot, Britain's chief Executioner at the time in the prison's execution chamber, hidden behind a thick oak door marked simply E-execution room, he learned the precise calculations needed for the drop, the complex mathematical formula that determined the length of rope required based on the prisoner's height, weight, and physical condition. The formula, developed by Dr. Samuel Horton in 1866, required a drop of 8 feet for a person weighing 68 pounds to ensure instant death through cervical dislocation. His training included practicing with sandbags weighing exactly as much as human bodies and studying detailed anatomical charts to understand the mechanics of judicial hanging. The rope itself, made of pure Italian hemp, was crafted by John Eddington of London, the same company that supplied the Admiralty. His first execution as an assistant took place at Dublin's Mountjoy prison on December 23, 1932. Alongside his uncle Thomas, the condemned was Patrick McDermott, a 28-year-old farmer convicted of murdering his brother. Albert later recalled in his memoirs, "I was nervous, but more determined than ever to do everything right. The weight of history and family expectation bore down on me heavier than any sandbag I had practiced with his hands." Reportedly did not shake as he pinioned the prisoner's arms. The prison chaplain, Father Michael O'Sullivan, would later write, "I have never seen such composure in one so young, faced with such a grave responsibility." By 1940, Albert had established himself as Britain's most efficient and professional executioner. His precision was such that in some cases, the time between entering the condemned cell and the drop of the trapdoor was as little as 12 seconds, a record he set at Strangeways Prison in Manchester during the execution of James English in 1951. Prison officials noted his exceptional ability to maintain composure while treating the condemned with dignity. As one Wellsworth prison officer, William Willis, remarked in 1941, Pierrepoint brings a dignity to the proceedings that almost makes you forget its grim nature. He moves like a surgeon, each action precise and necessary. His record-keeping became the gold standard for the profession. Each execution was documented in a leather-bound notebook with a black morocco cover, including not just technical details, but also observations about the prisoner's final moments and behavior. He noted everything from the prisoner's last words to the weather conditions on the morning of execution. These records, which survived until his death in 1992, would later prove invaluable in studying the history of capital punishment in Britain. One particularly moving entry from 1944 described a young soldier condemned for desertion. He died as bravely as he should have fought. By the mid-1940s, Albert Pierrepoint had executed over 200 people, earning him the unofficial title of the Master Executioner. His reputation for efficiency and professionalism led to his selection for particularly sensitive cases, including the execution of wartime traitors like Dorothy Agradi, known as the New Forest Spy, who was reprieved just hours before her scheduled execution in 1940. His pay rate at this time was £115 per execution, plus expenses, a modest sum for such a weighty responsibility. When asked about his fee in a rare 1947 interview, he simply stated, "It's not about the money, it never was. It's about doing what must be done properly, the weight of justice." Albert Pierrepoint's most haunting cases in the bitter winter of 1945. Albert Pierrepoint received an extraordinary commission that would forever alter the course of his career. The British government, through Major General Sir Wilfrid Lyndall, recognizing his unparalleled expertise, selected him to execute convicted Nazi war criminals in Germany. December 13, 1945, marked his first arrival at Hamel Prison in Lower Saxony, where he would ultimately hang 200 people convicted of war crimes at various locations across Germany. The British Army provided him with a special passport identifying him as a special administrative official. To maintain secrecy, he traveled under the alias Mr. Egg Jones and was paid £15 per execution, plus expenses, significantly more than his usual domestic fee of £115. Among the most notorious cases was Irma Grease, known as the Beautiful Beast of Belsen, executed on December 13, 1945 at age 22. Grease, along with Elizabeth Valkenrath and Johanna Bormann, was convicted for crimes at Bergen-Belsen and Ates concentration camps, according to witnesses including British Army Captain Derek Norton Taylor. Grease walked to the gallows with a haunting smile, her head held high. She had spent her last days writing poetry and letters to her family. Pierrepoint would later write in his diary she died as she had lived, without asking for mercy. The night before her execution, she carefully arranged her prison uniform and polished her boots, determined to maintain her appearance until the end. Her last words were reportedly Schnell quickly in a previously unpublished letter to his wife. And discovered in 2015, he wrote, "She was 22, the same age as our Mary. She walked to the gallows reciting her multiplication tables like a schoolgirl trying to be brave." Joseph Kramer, the Beast of Belsen, met his end the same day. Pierrepoint noted that Kramer, unlike many others, showed genuine fear in his final moments before his execution. Kramer had attempted to justify his actions to prison chaplain Reverend Leslie Keith, claiming he was only following orders. The executions at Hamel required extraordinary precision, as Pierrepoint sometimes had to conduct multiple hangings in a single day. On February 27, 1948, he executed 13 prisoners in one day at Hamel prison, starting at dawn and finishing after dusk, a record that would stand throughout his career. These included Wolfgang Jus, Karl Klipp, and Fritz Herrenstein, all former SS officers. The schedule was so tight that Pierrepoint had only 7 minutes between each execution, requiring military-like precision and coordination with his assistant Henry Critchell. Back in Britain, Pierrepoint faced equally challenging cases that captured public attention. The execution of Derek Bentley on January 28, 1953, at Wellsworth Prison sparked particular controversy. Bentley, 19 years old and functionally illiterate with a mental age of 11, had been convicted under the common purpose rule for the murder of police Constable Sidney Miles. Despite not pulling the trigger himself, his final words, "Everyone knew I didn't do it," would haunt the British justice system for decades. His sister Iris spent the next 45 years campaigning for his posthumous pardon, which was finally granted in 1998. The case generated such public outrage that 20,000 MPs signed a petition for clemency, which was ultimately rejected by Home Secretary Sir David Maxwell F. The night before Bentley's execution, hundreds of protesters gathered outside the prison singing hymns and holding candlelight vigils. The John Reg Christie case in 1953 presented another moral dilemma that would shake the foundations of British justice. Christie's testimony had previously helped condemn Timothy Evans to death for murders that Christie himself had committed at 10 Rington Place, Notting Hill. Evans was executed by Pierrepoint on March 9, 1950. Maintaining his innocence until the end, Pierrepoint recalled that Evans appeared dazed and confused during his final moments, repeatedly mumbling "Why me?" when Christie's true guilt was discovered through years later. The case became known as the Death House Scandal when Pierrepoint executed Christie at Pentonville Prison on July 15, 1953. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily. Christie, a former special constable, had murdered at least 8 women, including his wife, Ethel, during his final hours. Christie obsessively read the Bible and complained about the quality of his last meal, a cup of tea and some biscuits. The prison doctor, Dr. Morris Randall, noted that Christie appeared to be in a dissociative state, talking to himself about his garden where he had buried several victims. Perhaps no case affected public opinion more than that of Ruth Ellis, the last woman hanged in Britain on July 13, 1955. Pierrepoint executed Ellis at Holloway Prison for the murder of her lover David Blakely. Ellis, a 28-year-old nightclub hostess and model, had shot Blakely outside the Magdala pub in Hampstead, London on Easter Sunday. The case exposed class prejudices and gender bias in the justice system. Ellis's working-class background and profession were repeatedly emphasized during her trial. Her defense lawyer, Millord Stevenson QC, later admitted he had not presented evidence of domestic abuse that might have reduced her charge to manslaughter the night before her execution. Ellis gave her diamond engagement ring to her prison ward, Mary Price, saying, "I won't be needing this anymore." Her last request was to have her nails painted red, which was granted outside the prison. Journalist Duncan Webb reported that the crowd of over 1,000 people fell completely silent at 9 a.m., the moment of her execution. Film director Deanna Dors, who later played Ellis in a biographical film, was among the protesters the execution of homosexual lovers James Pride and John Smith at Hull Prison on November 8, 1954 for the murder of taxi driver William Schofield. Represented another case where public opinion was divided. The fact that their identity was repeatedly highlighted during the trial and in media coverage reflected the prejudices of the era. The News of the World's headline read, "Killer lovers face the gallows while focusing more on their relationship than the crime itself." Prison chaplain Reverend George Phillips later revealed that the men requested to be buried in the same grave, a request that was denied. Pierrepoint maintained his professional demeanor despite the social controversy, treating them with the same dignity he afforded all condemned prisoners. In his diary, he noted their love for each other was evident until the end. They asked to hold hands as they walked to the scaffold. "I could not grant this request, but I ensured they were placed in adjacent cells the night before the execution."